Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, our weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, Japan, the worst disaster since the Second World War. Just how will debt-ridden Japan pay for the earthquake and tsunami recovery? And the wider effects, nuclear powers being questioned. Some countries are reconsidering new reactors. We look at the lessons of 25 years ago at Chernobyl. Plus other business news, business and pleasure actually. The ski lovers hitting pristine slopes in an unexpected destination for the ultimate adrenaline rush. Hello everyone. Japan is front and centre this week. Of course it is. The worst crisis, as we said, since World War II. An earthquake and tsunami, plus a damaged nuclear power plant. Thousands of people dead, a nation suffering, sickening blow after blow. All that considered, it might seem a touch distasteful perhaps to be looking at the economic impact, but what a cost there is to be counted in Japan and the rest of the world, which will feel the knock-on effect. The cost is hard to quantify exactly yet, but analysts are publishing some numbers. Goldman Sachs believes the cost could be as high as $200 billion. And remember, Japan, the world's third biggest economy, is such an important engine of growth for the rest of Asia and the world. Problem is, Japan will have a huge challenge in raising the money to fund its rebuilding. Why? Because it, like so many other countries, is badly in debt. Quite badly, actually. Right now it stands at almost 200% of gross domestic product. In the year starting April 1st, the next financial year, Japan's debt is likely to hit $12.2 trillion. And already the Bank of Japan's had to step in. The first trading day after the earthquake, it pumped $183 billion into the financial sector to avert a crisis, with more to come in the following days. So here's what we're going to do. We'll look at the economy. Can Japan recover, or will it slip back into recession? And we'll also look at the nuclear industry, the uphill task of convincing the public that it is worth the risk, while the crippled Fukushima plant appears to prove otherwise. To look at the economic side, though, we welcome back to Counting the Cost Dr. Seijiro Takeshita, the Director of Investment Bank at Mizuho International. It is the British arm of its namesake in Japan. Seijiro, thank you for coming back. Very busy week it has been for you, I'm sure. Let's just talk through the damage to the economy. What's your initial take on it?
Yeah. Well, it's very, very clear that this will put us into recession if your terminology is basically 2 quarters of decline. Definitely will be facing that. But as far as production side is concerned, I'm not too worried. It's almost a standard operating procedure for many of these Japanese manufacturers to cope with these earthquakes, to diversify their production and procurement, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, it takes about 4, 5, 6 months for them to claw itself back to the normal level of production. The bigger problem here is the provision of energy and, of course, electricity supply. The shortage of it in the Tokyo area is what it really, really hurts. And that is the negativity that we're facing right now. And because it is also related to nuclear issues, as you just reported, the sentiment, especially in private consumption side, certainly will be exacerbated from here onwards.
Let me add something else to that list, because you talked about manufacturing, building in this sort of thing and being able to bounce back. The question I've got is trade. We've seen the pictures of these ports that have been completely destroyed. How is Japan going to get all that stuff out to the world?
Basically, the trade, most of the procurement and also transportation, logistics of it is through either Kanto region in Tokyo, Yokohama, Kawasaki area, and also in Kansai. And therefore, the ports that you see destructed has to do with a lot of fishery or more of the domestic logistics. And from that point of view, I don't think there will be a big damage that will be imposed. I don't think that is a problem that we're facing right now.
Let's look at the market side of things. Obviously, the Nikkei fell heavily in the first few days after the earthquake and tsunami. Other markets followed suit. Do you see it as a bounce, or are we, and by we, I mean the market, heading into very negative territory?
It depends on what happens to the Fukushima plant, of course, but it is very, very clear from anyone's eyes that we have the methodology, we have the resource, we have the experience of clawing ourselves back from crisis, especially that's caused by earthquakes. So production-wise, that certainly will take time, but it will claw itself back. And also, we will probably see some kind of a Keynesian type of recovery in Northeast Japan with a lot of public works. This would be an opportunity for the government to scrap all the incentives and subsidies, which, in my opinion, were merely almost like brown-nosing type of policy to the Japanese voters. They can scrap that and concentrate their resources into much more high-multiplying industries or plans, which basically would rejuvenate the economy to a much better extent. So not everything is in the dark. There could be some positivity that will be coming out of this, and one of it is, of course, solidarity amongst the people, but also the unification of passing the legislation by the government itself. Right now, we have a gridlock diet, which prohibits, the legislation to go through, but that could be smoothened out because of this crisis.
The cost of this whole thing, Jazeera, it's, I would say, almost impossible to put one on it just yet. There are a few numbers out there already. What are your thoughts, numbers-wise?
Well, it would be substantially larger, unfortunately, than Kobe. But as I said, we can take a different methodology. In case of Kobe, you had to build infrastructure again on top of Kobe. And this time, you could make a little more diversified approach than the ones that we had in Kobe. And of course, also the scale of damage on infrastructure is far greater and wider as well. And at the same time, we have a different budget conditions from the days of 1995, so that has been inherited as well. But again, at this point, I think it's very difficult to reassess. One thing that is very clear is that the standard of safety regulations of a nuclear side, that is going to be strengthened. But at the same time, I'd like to stress the point that Japan is not an option of regressing back into other resources of power, considering the fact that we basically rely 90% of our crude oil to the Middle East area, which is very much in the danger zone. So obviously, the mid-long-term plan of the Japanese energy policy to increase the nuclear side dependency from 30% to possibly 60 or 70% by the year 2030, that direction itself will not be changed, but I think the regulation will be much more straightened.
One final thing we haven't addressed, Jazeera, and that is the fact that Japan is a heavily indebted country. Therefore, a disaster like this, I mean, you never want it to happen, but it's come at a very bad time. Where is it going to get the money?
Well, it will be further accumulation of debt. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And certainly, I'm not going to say that we should be relaxing in a sofa, not worrying about it. However, there's an excessive pessimism that's been swirling around about this matter. First of all, 94% of our debt are consumed within. We also have 1,400 yen worth of private assets. The fact of the matter is, people only look at our negative debt side. We're also the world's largest creditor. So it is not all in the pitch black. Of course, I'm not saying that the music is going to churn on forever. Of course, it's running out. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that we're in a state of, for example, of Greece or Ireland. Far from it. Therefore, we will be able to rejuvenate, at least the churn out the financing for this rejuvenation process of this earthquake.
Some great analysis there from Seijiro Takeshita from Mizuho International in London. Thank you, Seijiro. So let's move to the nuclear issue now. We've discussed it a little bit because Japan, and specifically Fukushima, is now being mentioned in the same breath as places like 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, the big nuclear disasters of our time. Which brings into question the development of new plants at a time when the industry was actually experiencing a bit of a renaissance. Potentially billions of dollars were going to new reactors in the places which crave energy the most, places like China and India. Here's just a few numbers for you. India, for example, plans to spend $175 billion on nuclear technology by the year 2030. China has 13 operational reactors. It plans to have 110. And the producers of nuclear energy in the United States, they're worth about $18 billion, all of which now has to be seriously reviewed. For example, 2 nuclear plants have come under scrutiny in California, a state where 50 new seismic fault lines have been found in just the last 20 years. Rob Reynolds has this report from San Onofre in California.
The San Onofre nuclear power plant sits on the California coast midway between Los Angeles and San Diego, so close to the ocean that waves lap up near its seawall. It's in an active earthquake zone. And so is the nuclear plant at Diablo Canyon near San Luis Obispo, which was built directly over a geological fault. In the wake of the catastrophe in Japan and fears of radioactive meltdown at the stricken Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, nuclear industry officials in the U.S. have been quick in seeking to reassure the public that there's nothing to worry about here.
We can say with confidence, the confidence of some very recent science, that our operators can shut this plant down and protect the nearby residents in the most significant earthquake this region would probably experience.
The Obama administration sees nuclear as a way of combating global warming and easing reliance on foreign oil. It has included $36 billion in loan guarantees for new plant construction in its 2012 budget.
U.S. power plants are designed to very high standards for earthquake effects.
Geologists believe the worst quake possible near San Onofre would be a magnitude 6.5. The buildings are made to survive a 7.0 quake, and the seawall is over 7 meters high.
The utility that operates this nuclear power plant and the federal government that regulates it both believe that it's built to withstand the biggest earthquakes and tsunamis that are ever likely to hit this stretch of coast. Of course, the Japanese believe the same thing about their nuclear power plant, too.
The news from Japan suggests that even the most advanced scientific predictions may be inadequate when it comes to rare but extremely destructive events.
But ultimately, a question that these terrible images poses is, this is the cost of nuclear power, and are we willing to accept that cost?
Senior lawmakers in Washington say the inability of scientists to be certain how hard a blow nature can strike at any given place and time is reason enough to put a moratorium on new nuclear plant permits.
We have to listen to what is happening in Japan and protect ourselves and our people.
The federal government is currently considering applications for 20 new nuclear plants in the U.S.
Now, it is a quarter of a century since the world's worst nuclear accident. Radioactive debris from the Chernobyl nuclear accident rained down across Europe. At the plant itself, 31 workers and firefighters died. Neve Barker went to Ukraine to see what lessons had been learnt.
More than 800,000 engineers, soldiers and volunteers known as liquidators were put in immediate charge of the disaster. Surviving Ukrainian liquidators say at least 140,000 of their co-workers have died, many from cancer.
As soon as I saw the reactor leaking into the atmosphere, I understood the true nature of the catastrophe and the devastating impact on my children.
A quarter of a century on, and the concrete sarcophagus covering the reactor is crumbling. Inside, more than 100 tons of volatile radioactive fuel, dust and debris. A new cover is under construction, promising 100 years of safety, but the project's seriously underfunded. The nearby town of Pripyat was badly affected. Even now, 25 years later, a simple measurement by this MOS shows levels 45 times higher than normal. 5 million people were exposed to high levels of radiation. It caused a dramatic increase in mutations and thyroid cancer, especially in children. The area will be contaminated for hundreds of years. Many experts dismiss the idea of another disaster on this scale happening in Japan. The situation was made worse because the Soviet government hid the facts. Like Chernobyl, now in Japan, millions of lives hang on a small group of technicians for whom death or serious illness is almost certain.
Now, right now, the idea of more nuclear plants might seem risky, but nuclear energy is a very attractive option because, quite simply, it's cheaper. And cheaper is nearly always a deciding factor. Look at this. This is interesting. To produce 1 megawatt of power using coal, very common energy commodity, costs about $60. Get into the greener technology, wind, freely available, clean to boot, $140 and still not the most expensive. That's solar. But if you look at nuclear, $50 to produce 1 megawatt of power. It is less than pretty much every other option. So that is the reality. Cheaper by a long margin, especially over the green options, which is a sort of sad irony, but this is the result. 442 nuclear reactors worldwide, producing 15% of the world's electricity. 115 more are to be built, most of them in Asia. And this is the list of the top users: the United States with 104, France 58, and Japan 54. Joining us from Paris to discuss the issue of nuclear energy is the Director General of the OECD Nuclear Energy Agency. Here's Louis Echevarri. Thank you so much for your time, sir. With everything you've seen in the last week or so happening at Fukushima plant in Japan, what are your feelings about the image of nuclear power? Has it really taken a hit?
Of course, yes. I think it's all around the head news of every media. There is a lot of attention of every country, and the society is very concerned with the evolution of the accident. But we have to consider that this has happened in the middle of a terrible catastrophe in Japan, where we have many casualties because of the tsunami. But in any case, the attention of the people to the nuclear accident has been huge all around the globe.
You made a key point there, I think. You talked about the tsunami itself, because every other nuclear expert I've spoken to on Al Jazeera has been saying the good news, if you like, is that Fukushima withstood the earthquake. It did what it was supposed to, and they're saying what caused all the problems in the end was the tsunami. The fact is, tsunamis are perhaps more regular than we like to think, and maybe having an earthquake-proof reactor isn't enough anymore.
Well, of course, we have to analyze in detail what has happened there to draw the lessons. But it is true that the plant resisted normally an earthquake which was bigger than it was expected, and the plant shut down immediately. But as a consequence of that, it was necessary to bring up the emergency power, because the grid, the big grid outside the station, collapsed. And 1 hour after that, the tsunami, which was of a very unexpected size, really damaged the emergency cooling. So it has been the combined effects of both things which have created this nuclear accident. But it is true that the plant resisted well the earthquake.
But that's not enough, is it, in the end? I mean, we're seeing that to withstand an earthquake in an earthquake-prone country wasn't enough.
Yes, what we have to see now is really how we apply the consideration that you can have several natural events at the same time with a proportion, or let's say a size, really much more than it was thought before, and to make a very careful analysis of the existing nuclear power plants, and the regulatory bodies all around the world have already started this process, and analyzing how the plants could be resisting natural events. Not only earthquakes, it is necessary to review the seismic design of the plants, but also the combination with some other effects, like, for example, tsunamis, again of a proportion higher than the one that was suspected. But, for example, this brings up other things. There are areas of the world where there is no tsunamis, but you can have floodings. Maybe you have to see how plants resist to a much bigger flood than it was foreseen before. This process has already started. On the other hand, this is going to affect the new designs of plants, and there will be an international evaluation of the implications of this accident, trying to improve the designs in a way which can cope also with this.
What do you think of some of the other international reaction we've seen? Germany's ordered a review of its future plants. China has said it's going to halt a lot of its nuclear projects. Is that a measured response, or even maybe too strong a knee-jerk reaction?
Well, you are right that there has been important decisions very quickly in some countries. I think this response to the situation of every particular country. Nuclear is very sensitive in Germany, especially, and therefore there has been a lot of discussions and reactions politically there. China is building the biggest new nuclear power program at this moment. They have more than 25 new units under construction. It is logic that they are considering how this affects that program. So I think these are two examples of situations, but there are other countries which, for example, Switzerland has announced that their plans they have for new nuclear power plants are stopped for the moment, and some other countries. So I think it is important that the new decisions for the future are based on a good knowledge of what has happened in Fukushima and what are the implications of that accident. whether with some improvements the plants can cope with these situations or not. And maybe there are some situations in which it is going to be very costly or very difficult to come with the appropriate level of protection. But this exercise, I think, has to be done, and I think it's prudent, really, because, you know, this accident didn't come because of either a design failure or an equipment failure or a bad operation of the unit. No. It came because the combination of an earthquake and a tsunami of huge proportions, which have caused in Japan, as we have seen, thousands of people being killed by that. So is that a catastrophic natural event which has brought up the nuclear accident? So this has to be analyzed and to see really that this is possible. In fact, that has passed, but to analyze whether new safety requirements can be imposed to maintain the plants in safe operation, even in that situation.
Final point, because you have referred a lot in your answers to learning lessons, and obviously there are a lot of lessons to be learned. Arguably, there were a lot of lessons to learn 25 years ago in a place like Chernobyl, and people are still paying for that these days, still trying to build a safety cage around the reactor there to limit the fallout 25 years on. Do you think enough was learnt from that?
Yes, I think that the accident of Chernobyl was very well analyzed and conclusion was drawn. But the accident of Chernobyl was not a reference accident for the technology that most of the countries were using. It was very specific for that technology. And second, the accident in Fukushima has nothing to do with the accident of Chernobyl, neither in the root cause, not in the way in which happened, and not in the consequences. So I think that the right comparison is more with 3 Mile Island. It's more severe than 3 Mile Island, and more release of reactivity has gone outside, more because in 3 Mile Island the containment building maintained practically all the fission products inside, but this accident is more comparable to that rather than to Chernobyl.
Joining us from Paris there was Louis Echevarri from the OECD's Nuclear Energy Agency. We thank you for your time, sir. Finally, for skiing lovers looking for a new destination, there is an unspoilt paradise to explore. Problem is, it's also, broadly speaking, in a war zone. Can the investment pay off? Will the tourists come? Sue Turton finds out.
Forget San Moritz, Zermatt or Whistler Mountain. The new hotspot for the discerning ski tourist is Afghanistan. This is the Koti Baba mountain range in Bamiyan province, 130 kilometres west of Kabul. There are no lift queues. Well, there are no lifts. There are no crowded pistes because there are no crowds and no pistes. But breathtaking scenery makes the hike up the slopes worthwhile. Chakari grew up in these hills.
Taliban came here and also they killed a lot of people here.
He's one of many locals being taught to be a ski guide by Ferdinando Rolando, a veteran guide from the Alps. Nando is working hard to be accepted by the local community.
So my assistant come from the valley over here. So when the father can know that, yeah, the mullah say you shouldn't share nothing, but say, no, I want to share ski. And if you make a profit, normal profit, driver, farmer, we buy food for the customer, we use their facilities.
Getting to Bamiyan couldn't be easier. The UN is giving free flights from Kabul to promote the project.
It's quite a trip when you come skiing down through the villages and the kids come out and they're all delighted to see you. They can't wait to carry your skis for you. And they love it because the programs that Nando runs in the villages get them on skis, get them exposed to it early.
Today, some local girls are having their first lesson thanks to the Aga Khan Foundation, who launched the $1.2 million project 2 years ago. But not everybody here is on board.
The Bamiyan people are very forward-thinking. They have the first female governor in the history of Afghanistan. But Afghan women on skis, they're not quite ready for that.
I don't like it because they can't control the hijab when they're skiing.
It's not good when a girl leaves her home. It's not good for her safety.
Cultural concerns aside, it's hoped families who have lived in these harsh mountains for generations will now benefit from the strange foreigners with planks in their feet trudging through the snow.
Just time enough to tell you about Counting the Cost online. You start at aljazeera.net/English, click the business tab at the top, follow the links to the Counting the Cost page for blogs and episodes in full. And then when you want to get in touch, you get on Twitter, @KamalAJE is where you'll find me. Send in your questions and thoughts, or just get in touch if you like. Always happy to hear from our viewers. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santa Maria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.